designed for inflicting bodily harm or physical damage. Some of these weapons are simple, like a rock or a stick, but through the millenniums, man has managed to create complex weapons that can murder torturously or even just incapacitate with a stunning amount of pain. Weapons have also assisted in the past and even now with hunting for food. Now, weapons are used for vengeance, mass murder, self-defense, and much more. Here's some of the history that has led us to the weapons we know today.
Here are a few facts. No one really knows what the first murder weapon is. And for every different ancient civilization, they have a different history for their weaponry. In Genesis 4, it gives the first account of the first murder. It's a story about two brothers, Cain and Abel. Now, Cain and Abel made offerings to God, and God found favor in Abel's offering and not Cain's. When Cain realized this, he became very jealous and mad at his brother. One day, Cain invited his brother into the field, and Cain killed his brother Abel, therefore making Cain the first murderer.
Tonight we feast. Gonna need some arrowheads. Easy.
Did you see? I almost got him.
You're right.
Hey, what did you shoot my cow?
No, yeah, well, we're hunters.
Well, he's a hunter. I'm a maker.
A maker?
You know, I made this loincloth, I make arrows, I've made a shelf unit for my hut.
What do you do?
We're farmers. Well, he's a farmer. I'm a herdsman. My brother, Cain. I'm called Abel. You were called Suck. My brother's angry because God looked on my sacrifice with favor. God looked at my sacrifice with favor. I mean, is he a total suck or what?
It's hard to say, we just met.
Why bring these guys in with? They don't know anything. They're morons.
They live in a tree.
Oh, man. You just gotta be so superior to everyone else.
No, but superior than you.
Superior to everyone else? You know what I mean. You know what I mean. Oh, man. You want some of that?
Just relax and let's all just get some perspective.
Oh, yeah. That's how we do it. Yeah, right.
Can we try and stop?
Let's just let them settle it.
Yeah.
I guess that settles it.
Oh, God, what have I done? What have I done?
What do I continue to do? Oh.
Now, this is a more humorous reenactment of what may have happened. But the Bible really doesn't say if Cain really used a rock or his hands or some other tool that may have been around him. And prehistoric weapons were far more advanced than just a simple rock. Cave paintings dating back to 500,000 to 10,000 BC in Spain depict men fighting with bows and arrows. And as early as 6,000 BC, African cave paintings show men fighting with clubs. And in the prehistoric times, clubs proved to be a surprisingly effective weapon for killing people. In prehistoric times, some of their weaponry was axes, spears, bow and arrows, and these were all shown in cave paintings dating back to the prehistoric times. In ancient Egypt, weapons mostly consisted of spears, maces, swords, daggers, clubs, bow and arrows, and slings. The ancient Egyptians mostly fought on foot around this time, and in 700 BC, the army was introduced and began using chariots pulled by horses. In 3500 BC, the Sumerians fought with chariots that were pulled by donkeys. Some of their weaponry were bows and arrows, spears, axes, and clubs. And the ancient Greeks' main weapon was the spear. And they liked to use the spear with a concave shield. What's ironic about the Greeks is that some of the best swords at this time were made in Greece, but the Grecians still preferred to use spears when in battle. Now, let's fast forward a couple thousand years, and you get your first handgun.
As we know, early guns weren't really guns. There were these weapons that fired 200-pound stone balls. Yes, this was a cannon. Because cannons were very expensive, they were very hard to build, and they were very massive. Smaller calibers were desired. This led to the invention of the handgun. The handgun was a small iron or bronze cannon barrels attached to long, lengthy staffs. In the 15th century, the types of weaponry with long stone and barrel locks were common. The first one was called a matchlock. It was a very prestigious weapon back then. It was the very first weapon that could be carried, loaded, and discharged. This muzzle gun discharged when a lit match was lowered into a flash pan. The only bad thing about it is it wasn't very reliable or accurate. It was impossible to use in wet weather, and it was terrible for hunting because the burning match would actually scare away the game. So furthermore, a new lock design was desired. Not too long after the matchlock, the wheel lock was invented. For the first time, a firearm can now be carried, loaded, primed, and ready to fire. The wheel lock also spurred the gun we know as the pistol. After using the wheel lock for so long, they started finding difficulties with that as well. If the wrench, which was necessary to actually make the gun work, if it was lost, the weapon was completely useless. With so many parts with the design of the gun, it was very expensive and it was very costly to maintain. As you can see, the invention for a new gun was again needed. That's why the flintlock was invented. The flintlock was more simple and it was actually very reliable. It was a bit more weatherproof because most of the parts were inside the gun, other than the previous guns where most of the parts were outside the gun. The flintlock was put to the test. For over 200 years, the European armies used this as their primary weapon, and the U.S. used this as their customary weapon. The U.S. called it their prized possession because it was the very first gun small American boys would actually use before they trained to go to war. As time progressed, America wanted to get involved after being introduced to the flintlock. The very first original American contribution was the Kentucky rifle. The gun was lighter and stronger, and also used a smaller caliber, which is a lot better. A bullet fired from the rifle would spin, which made this significant because it would help any imperfections that would distort flight. Another American contribution was the muskets. The muskets weren't as fast, they didn't load as fast as the Kentucky rifles, but George Washington made use of both of these in the wars they fought in. The next step in the firearm development was the flintlock, but with the percussion cap. Reverend Alex Forsyth, he had a flintlock, but he was frustrated with how the trigger pull, there was a delay between the trigger pull and the actual fire of the gun. So he created the percussion cap. Within this cap was a small amount of impact-sensitive explosion. This also allowed muzzle guns not to use exposed priming powder to fire. This also made the gun quicker to use and completely weatherproof. There's still one problem though. Carriers were still limited to a single shot before reloading. In 1836, Samuel Colt perfected and patented a revolving handgun. He put together existing features from previous guns and fashioned them into a reliable revolver. However, it wasn't until 1856 that Horace Smith and Daniel Weston took over. Smith and Wesson spent their time perfecting ammunition. Taking advantage of all options, they produced the world's first revolver that could fire a fully self-contained cartridge. As handguns were progressing, long arms began to catch up as well. By 1860, Tyler Henry, who was a gunsmith, created a breech lever action revolver that fired 16 rounds. This was a very useful and reliable gun, but it wasn't until 1866 that Winchester improved on his gun, firing a rifle that was 18 rounds. His rifle had a wooden firearm to make it less hot to handle and contained a familiar side-loading port. In 1873, the two most legendary guns of the Old West were produced. These were the Winchester model and the Colt model, also known as the Peacemaker. Even though these guns were the most powerful firearms in the game, to what was next had no comparison, the machine gun. The most famous of the early machine guns was a gun that was mounted on 6 axes and had 6 loading barrels. It was fired by hand crank, so technically it really wasn't automatic. By 1884, Sir Stephen Maxim invented the Maxim gun. The Maxim gun, it was automatic. The action continued with a single trigger pull that fired 10 rounds per second. Stephen Maxim spent years studying how to recoil energy for a gun, but men like John Browning and John Thompson took over and built off Maxim's successes and made machine guns smaller and lighter. By this time, the 15th century rolled around, and fully automatic weapons that could be carried and operated by a single man became commonplace and necessary for any army. Throughout time, handheld firearms have been essential to preserving life, the enforcement of law and justice, and the establishment and the protection of our liberty. Here's some more information on modern-day machine guns.
In 1914, machine guns were thought to need a lot less work than actually needed. The original theory was that these guns would fire about 400 to 600 rounds per minute, and by the end of World War II, that this figure would double. But in reality, these guns overheated very quickly and could not be used without a cooling aid. They needed about 4 to 6 men to operate, and by the end of the war, they really weren't very effective because they overheated too quickly. And now to some more modern-day machine guns. The XM307 ACSW machine gun is said to be one of the most dangerous machine guns in the world. It has a shooting range of about 2,500 yards and can hit its targets with extreme accuracy and precision. It can fire about 250 rounds per minute. It is gas operated, and it has a rotating bolt weapon. Designed by Uziel Gal in the 1940s, the Israeli Uzi gun is known for its lightweight, and its weight ranges about from 3 to 3.5 kilograms. This gun is best for short distances. Its maximum shooting range is about 200 meters, and it can shoot up to 600 rounds per minute. The German MG-34 was produced during the World War II and has a firing range of about 1,100 to 1,200 rounds per minute, and it also is fed by a belt of bullets. The Thompson M192 machine gun, or otherwise known as the Tommy gun, was created by American designer John T. Thompson in 1918. This is a submachine gun, or a semi-machine gun, but a machine gun no less. This submachine gun can fire 600 rounds in 1 minute. Its effective shooting range about 50 yards, and its feeding mechanism, depending on which model and make you get, but for this particular model and make, it takes a 50-round magazine. And lastly, we have the Heckler Hawk HK MG43 machine gun. This was produced by Heckler Hawk himself. This gun was originally made in the 1990s, and it is notorious for never missing a shot. This gun is known for hitting its adversaries with such accuracy and precision that the target is no longer, it causes irreparable damage. It is gas operated, has a rotating bolt head, and in a recent American test, the MG43 successfully fired 104,000 rounds with one single barrel. Now, machine guns are awesome and all, but there's sometimes you want to hurt your opponent without blowing them to pieces. Here are some non-lethal weapons.
Like you just said, I mean, guns, rock, sticks, they're good and all if you want to kill the person, but sometimes you want to take somebody down without actually causing them, to be dead. And so we have non-lethal weapons, which there's actually a pretty large market for them to just civilians in the form of stuff like tasers and pepper spray. But there's also much more advanced systems in place when it comes to the military and police work. So starting off with the tasers. Tasers are a widely available electroshock weapon. As the name suggests, electroshock weapons use electricity to shock your body. They're considered non-lethal, though in some cases they have caused death. There's two different kinds. there's a handheld one, a little larger than this remote, that has 2 electrodes that stick out the end that actually pass electricity between them. If you touch these electrodes to somebody, it delivers the shock. Its downside is you have to be right on top of the person really to use it. And then there's the gun-shaped ones, which we're more familiar with. We see a lot with police work. They work a lot better because they give you some range. It actually works with, there's a cartridge on the end that actually contains 2 nitrogen cartridges inside of it that propel 2 electrodes that stick into your body and deliver the voltage. And it stops you by causing neuromuscular incapacitation, which is really a fancy way of saying you lose control of your muscles. And it also messes with the neural pathways in your brain that determine movement, so it can leave you temporarily paralyzed for up to about 30 minutes. When shocked, your muscles contract up to about 19 times a second, and it burns through all the sugar that your muscles need to function. Next, we have pepper spray. As the name suggests, pepper spray is made out of peppers. The active ingredient is called oleoresin capsicum. It's made from the capsaicin that's refined after being extracted from the peppers. It's effective because it comes in the form of a liquid, which is very intrusive. It can fit in like small areas, it can get in your eyes, and it comes in the form of either like a stream, a mist, or a fog. And when it gets in your eyes, it has inflammatory properties that make your eyes swell up, makes you start crying, you can't see. And if you breathe it in, it starts burning your lungs. If it gets in your mouth, into your stomach, it makes you physically sick, you start throwing up. Pepper just coats your throat. Next, we move on to military and police weapons. Starting off with the phaser. Phaser stands for Personal Halting and Stimulation Response. It's pretty straightforward. As you can see, it looks like a gun. And what it uses is it uses 2 lasers. One low wavelength visible beam so you can tell where you're aiming. And it actually shoots an invisible laser that blinds the target temporarily. Since it blinds the target, it's considered a dazzler type weapon. Dazzler meaning it temporarily blinds or disorients its target. After that, we have the active denial system. It's a vehicle-mounted heat-based deterrent system. And essentially, that's a very fancy way of saying it's a heat ray. As you can tell, it looks a lot like a satellite dish, and it concentrates energy onto an area, and as long as it's concentrated on it, the temperature will just continue to rise over and over. When pointed at people, the average person can only stand being in it for about 3 to 5 seconds before their body's fight or flight response kicks in and they try to get out. It sounds like it would be dangerous, but for the most part, it doesn't actually cause any damage to your skin because the energy, it's low penetration. It just covers the very top layer. And for the most part, it hasn't caused any problems with the people it's been used on. There have been slight second-degree burns, but in a very minuscule percentage, about 0.1% of everybody it's been tested on. Next is one of the ones I thought was really cool. It's the laser-induced plasma channel. It works by shooting an invisible laser beam that actually ionizes gas around it to create plasma. The plasma is electrically conductive, and it actually creates its own lightning bolts that are directed at whatever the laser is pointed at. The lightning bolts work really well on disabling electronics or any equipment that runs on electricity, and it's good for incapacitating people, but as it has some controversy behind it because, as you could probably understand, lightning bolts aren't exactly the safest thing to send towards a person. Then we have the taser extra. This is going back towards the tasers. The gun-shaped tasers shoot up to 35 feet, which really is not that long of a range, so they decided to make something that would have a little more power and could travel a little bit farther. What it is it's a 12-gauge shotgun shell that has a taser inside of it instead of bullets or slugs. It's sectioned off into 2 parts, the front containing electrodes that stick into you, and the back containing a transformer, a battery, and a microprocessor. These 3 things actually regulate the amps and the voltage on it so that it doesn't end up killing you. It works really well, and it completely blows the range of the other ones out of the water. But it's not very mass produced because in the long run, not many people have used it. Next, we have the pulsed energy projectile. There's two kinds. There's the handheld one, as we see here, and there's also a vehicle-mounted system. It works a lot like the laser-induced plasma channel. It shoots an invisible laser beam that creates plasma. The difference is that this plasma actually explodes on impact. And when it explodes, it creates a flashbang-like effect, and that actually completely messes up your nervous system. What it does is it tricks your nervous system into thinking your body's either freezing, burning, you might even feel like you've been dipped in acid without causing any actual harm, and it also causes temporary paralysis for about 30 minutes. The final one is the Vortex Ring Gun. Vortex Ring Gun, right there, it's a handheld one, but it's another one that also has a vehicle-mounted base. And what it does is it super compresses air into a ring that's then shot at a target. It can knock the larger vehicle-mounted ones can knock down targets that are about 120 pounds from ranges of about 30 to about 60 feet. The handheld one, you can actually add in gases or chemical agents or malodorants, which are very bad smelling agents, that will engulf your target in a cloud of the smoke and just it'll make them nauseous, vomit, pretty much render them immobile. Well, this was supposed to be a video of the Vortex Ring Gun in action. There we go. It starts off silent. What you're seeing here is just it's prepping it up and it's shooting its smoke rings. That's all the air compresses by going around the cylinder, and it shoots out the end. And this is it being tested.
The gun can fire donut-shaped rings of air at a speed of at least 60 miles per hour for more than 50 yards. The rings are produced by forcing gas at high velocity through the gun cylinder. The gas in the rings is ionized, which will help particles inside the ring, such as tear gas or pepper spray, stick to the target.
Now, non-lethal weapons, they're made not to actually kill you, but on the other end of the spectrum, there are weapons that are actually designed to kill in mass quantities, kill thousands of people, cause awful destruction, and Ashley's here to tell you about those.
A weapon of mass destruction is a weapon with the capacity to inflict death and destruction on a massive scale. This term has been used since 1937 to describe mass formations of a bomber aircraft, but today it's used to describe weapons of biological, chemical, and nuclear. A biological weapon uses microbial forms of life such as bacteria, and one of these is anthrax. Anthrax is worldwide and it exists in soil. You can make it for under $3,000 if you have the right equipment. There's also the plague, which is a disease caused by Yersinia pestis. It can be contracted through direct physical contact, through the air, or even by other animals with the infection. In ancient China and medieval Europe, they used dead animals infected with that disease to plant in the enemy's water supplies so they could contract the disease and get weak. Also in World War II, the Japanese developed a weaponized version of it with fleas, and the Ishi even created a ceramic casing for it to drop. Chemical weapons use toxic properties of chemical substances, and Some of these are nerve agents. The first nerve agent was discovered in 1936 by a German research team. They were actually researching a new pesticide, which they finally made, and they called it Tubun. And they found out that it worked as a weapon against people when they accidentally dropped one on a lab bench, and two of the researchers got sick for 3 weeks. And due to a Nazi decree at that time, they had to report it to the military. Mustard gas is also a chemical weapon. It was first used by the German army in 1917. It's the most lethal, and it takes 12 hours to fully take effect. This blisters the skin, causes internal and external bleeding, and it also takes 4 to 5 weeks to kill a person. Nuclear weapons are also a weapon of mass destruction. It's a bomb or missile that uses nuclear energy to cause an explosion. They're not very logical because they cause severe long-term effects like air pollution and radiation. The first nuclear weapon was used in World War II when the U.S. dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. After that, they signed a treaty to stop the production of them, and in 1970 it took effect, and it was extended indefinitely in 1995. Although weapons of mass destruction can take people out over large distances, sometimes you just need your weapons to move. Here's a mommy day.
The first weapons used in mobile vehicular combat were blades on the sides of chariots. These kinds of chariots were called scythe chariots. They were mainly used to plow through enemy lines and bisect the enemy soldiers. It was particularly difficult for them to go through phalanx lines. They were mainly used by the Greek and Persian armies. Later, a new kind of animal would be used in warfare. That animal was the elephant. The elephant was mainly used in armies by India. These elephants could plow through and decimate the enemy soldiers very quickly. They were also very hard to take down. These elephants were mainly brutally trained through starvation, beatings, and malnutrition. These elephants were very violent and had to have a proper trainer with them. They were also used in executions where the elephant could stomp on a person's head or just step on their chest, crushing them with their massive feet and under their weight. Later, in World War I, weapons would start to become very well known on the battlefield. So one of these vehicles was the tank. Though the tank was well known on the battlefield, it wasn't very reliable. Tanks would often bog down or get churned up. Sometimes they would even stop walking in the middle of the battlefield. The tank did not have a very impressionable start, as the first prototype had its treads fell off and did not do very well. It was later approved for use later into the war. Now, these weapons were mainly used as cavalry vehicles to help provide support and to help entrench warfare very quickly. Unfortunately, they still had many problems, such as during the Battle of the Somme. During the Battle of the Somme, the tanks did horrifically there by getting bogged up, churned, or just breaking down in the middle of battle. In World War II, however, vehicular weapons started to become advanced and improved. The tank, however, was the most improved of all of them. But before, in World War I, the tanks were just not very well done. In World War II, however, tanks such as the Grizzly or the Russian Joseph Stalin were very effective in warfare. Also in World War II, airplanes. aircraft vehicles would also become very advanced, such as aerial dogfights. Dogfights, well, pilots would usually call dogfights like a knife fight in a phone booth. Aircraft were also used to drop off troops, such as the famous 101st Airborne Division during the attack on Omaha Beach. Submarines were also very vital in the war effort, as they could stealthily take down enemy ships. Submarines were mainly used by the Axis powers and the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Imperial Japanese Navy, however, had the largest out of all of them. Later in Vietnam, helicopters and aircraft would be very vital, but also very disastrous for American troops. Helicopters would mainly be used to provide air support in the jungles and to help take down enemy soldiers, and also to pick up wounded soldiers. Unfortunately, despite all our advanced technology, we still lost due to inefficient tactics and a lack of communication. One such incident about lack of communication was when an F-6 Phantom dropped a bomb on friendly soldiers, killing about 45 of them. Later into the future, artillery vehicles would become very important, such as the famous Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II. It's armed with its primary armament is a Gao-8 Avenger Gatling gun. Things would also become glorified missile launchers, such as the TOC-1 tank, armed with a 24-barrel rocket launcher and a thermal bomb, which could be fired, and when it's fired, when it hits it uses the surrounding oxygen to create a very violent explosion, taking out many enemy soldiers very quickly. These vehicles also had very heavy armor. One such case would be during the Iraq War, where a female pilot, I can't remember her name, took down many enemy soldiers there. Her Thunderbolt took a very heavy damage, but yet somehow she came out unscathed. These weapons are very vital to the battlefield and were not to be taken lightly.
Understanding of the word weapon. And remember that it can be a gun, a taser, a chemical, a gas, an atomic bomb, or even a vehicle. Thank you.